Hey guys, Brigi here, and in this video we're going to learn Figma from the basics. So this is going to be an entire Figma course for you to get it from beginner to intermediate in the fastest way possible. Now, I've been a designer for over a decade and I use Figma on a daily basis. So everything that I teach is from my personal experience. And just before we get started, I want to remind you that I recently launched a free Figma cheat sheet so that you can master the shortcuts and really make the workflow in Figma as efficient as you can, because learning shortcuts is going to help you not only become more efficient, but also work in a much more comfortable way. So feel free to check it out. It's going to be in the link in the description. But then without further ado, let's jump right into the course. In this video, we're going to talk about Figma's home screen. So once you signed up and you opened up Figma, either in the browser or in the standalone app, like it's in my case, you're going to notice a few different panels. Now, starting from the left, you're going to see that over here, you're going to have access to all of the basic settings of your profile. So if you ever need to change the settings, feel free to go over here. And you can also access the community profile, which we're going to talk about later on in this video series. Now, we're also going to notice that for the very most part, you're going to see the design files directly here. And you're going to, by default, see the recently viewed files, but you can also filter by shared files and also shared projects. So whenever a individual shares a file or a project with you, you can usually do it directly from here in a very easy way. There's also some other filters options which you might want to consider using. For example, if you prefer a list view over a grid view, you can easily do that from here. And you can also do some basic filtering, which for the very most part, you're not going to use since the main bulk is going to be on the recent projects. Now, in order to create a new design file, you can simply click on this blue button right here. And as you can see, this enables you to create your very first Figma design file. Now, before we go into the depth of the Figma user interface and how to actually use Figma, I just want to mention a few more things in the home, which is if you want to create a FigJam board, you can easily do that from here, which again is going to be a topic which we're going to discuss later on. You can also import other Figma files or even sketch files or some other type of files like images directly by clicking on the import section, which is going to prompt this view, which is going to enable you to find a Figma file and you can import it directly into Figma. Now, one last thing that you want to keep in mind is that over here on the left side panel, you're going to find also the drafts section, which is where all the drafts are going to be saved. And we're going to see the use of the drafts in future videos, as well as any teams that you're going to be part of. So if a client invites you to a team, or even if you want to create your personal team, you can easily do that by simply using this section right here. Now, this is pretty much it when it comes to the main home. So without further ado, let's jump into the actual design file. We're going to learn more about how to use Figma in order to create the designs that are going to bring your career to the next level. In this video, we're going to learn how to move around in a Figma file, which is quite easy and simple. So we're going to focus on the main way, which is going to use a combination of spacebar and the left mouse button. So starting from spacebar, you can see that the moment that I click on the spacebar, the cursor is going to change in this hand. And basically, if I use the left mouse button and I hold and drag it around, you can see how I can easily move between the X and Y axis in the Figma file. Now, on top of that, Another really useful shortcut is going to use the Command key, and then you're going to use the scroll wheel in order to zoom in and zoom out of the Figma file. So for the very most part, spacebar plus left mouse button and then Command key plus the scroll wheel up and down is going to do the trick. If you're using Windows, it's probably going to be the control key or instead of the command key. So keep that in mind. Now, on top of that, some useful things to keep in mind whenever you want to efficiently navigate a Figma file is the fact that you have a few different shortcuts which are going to make your life easier. So, for example, if I want to zoom in to a selection, in this case, it's going to be this element right here, I can simply click the 2 number, and as you can see, it's going to zoom in to that selection. Now, if I want to go back and I want to zoom to fit, simply press 1, and it's going to basically zoom out and make the whole composition fit to your screen. So again, simply select the element, 2 to zoom to selection, and then 1 to zoom to fit. Now, on top of that, there's a few different zoom and view options, which you have at the very top right of your Figma file. So you can see here some other keyboard shortcuts for the zoom in and zoom out. For example, by simply using Command plus, I can zoom in increments, and Command minus allows me to zoom out. But really, if I have to express my opinion working daily on Figma, I usually use a command and the scroll wheel as it's so much easier. So that is a recommendation. And when it comes to the other options, you're going to find that you can zoom to a specific amount in these options here. But for the very most part, you're probably either going to go with the zoom in, zoom out, or simply the command key plus the scroll wheel. So this is how you can easily move and navigate a Figma file in no time. In this video, we're going to learn about the move and the scale tool in Figma. So here we have 2 rectangles within a frame, which is essentially an artboard containing these 2 elements. And you can notice this by examining the layers panel right here. And essentially, if you want to use the move tool, which is the default tool, which is pre-selected in Figma, so you simply have to go under here, under move, and you're going to be able, as the name suggests, to move around elements within the artboard. You can also select the frames and you can move those frames as well. So this is going to be really useful, and in order to scale these items, what you want to do is to essentially use the scale tool. But just before we do that, I also want to remind you that if you hold the left mouse button and you simply browse through the area, you're going to see that this rectangle is going to appear. And this is allowing you to select all of the elements within a given area. So this works also right on top of the frames. You can easily select one or multiple frames directly by using the move tool with this option. And in order to scale, you're going to use the scale tool. And as you're going to see, if you hover on the borders of an element, you're going to see that the cursor changes, and it's going to allow you to scale an element in its Y and X axis. So really useful, and you can easily just change the size of elements in a very fast and efficient way. And this applies for layers such as rectangles or groups, as well as frames. So this is going to be something that you're likely going to use quite a lot in Figma, and it's something which is an essential thing to experiment with. In this video, we're going to talk about groups and frames, which are two elements that are going to really be useful in your workflow in Figma. So let's start with the first one, which is groups. Now, the group feature in Figma provides a way to combine multiple elements within the canvas. Constraints are not applicable to the grouped objects because the group feature doesn't include relative positioning. Now, that being said, I'm going to give you a live example so that this concept is going to make more sense. So we're going to create a few rectangles, and this is going to serve as the base for this explanation. So as you can see on the very left, under the layers panel, you're going to see these three rectangles as individual layers. Now, if I use the move tool and I select all of them, or alternatively, I can also do it directly from the layers panel using the shift key and selecting the very bottom layer after I selected the first one. And at this point, I can simply right click and go under group selection. And the moment I do that, you can see that the layers are not visible anymore, but we only have a group. Now, the layers are still there. In fact, if you click on this small arrow on the left of the group, you're still going to see them individually. But if I deselect and I hover over these elements, you can see that by default, the group is going to be selected. So I'm going to essentially select the group. And if I want to tweak the position or any feature really an option of the individual layer, I'm going to need to select the actual layer within the group. Now, a very easy way to do what is called a deep selection is going to use the command key. And as you can see, the moment that I keep pressing the command key, I can easily select the layers within this group because it's going to essentially do a deep selection, which is going to be something very useful to keep in mind, especially if as you're dealing with complex designs such as web apps, dashboards, websites, where there's going to be a lot of groups. So the deep select is definitely going to be one of the shortcuts that you're going to use all of the time. Now you can also ungroup a selection by simply right-clicking, and you're going to notice this option, which is ungroup. And as you can see, we're basically back to square one without the group. Now you can also use the keyboard shortcut Command plus G in order to group. And it's one of those keyboard shortcuts that you're going to want to learn if you're going to do a lot of designs in Figma, because you're probably going to group and ungroup items all the time. So, and if you forget any of these keyboard shortcuts, you can always reference the menu. You can see that on the right side, you're always going to see the keyboard shortcuts. And this is going to be applicable also in these menu items or over here. So Figma always gives us hints and reminders of these keyboard shortcuts. Now that we learned the concept of groups, let's move on to the concept of frames. And frames allow you to choose an area of the canvas to create your designs in. And unlike traditional artboards, you can also nest the frames within other frames. And this is going to allow you to create more complex design that work together. So in order to access and create a frame, simply select over here the frame option, and you can literally click with and hold with the left mouse button, and you're going to create a frame on top of the group. Now notice that the moment that I create this frame on top of the group is automatically nested within the frame. However, if you are not in such a position, you can always drag and drop a group within a frame. And this can be done also with individual layers. So I can create a rectangle and I can literally drag and drop it on top of the frame. And as you can see on the borders of this frame, these are becoming blue the moment that I hover over it. And this basically tells me that this layer item is about to be inserted in the frame. So this is the frame concept from an overview. And again, as I mentioned before, you can also create frames within the frames. So there isn't really a need just to have one frame. If you want, you can create nested frames within one another. And we're going to explore all these concepts in more detail, especially as we tackle more complex designs. You're going to see how all of these elements are going to nest together, work together, and enable you to create designs where the sky is the limit, really, when it comes to scalability, creativity, and the flexibility. So I'll see you in the very next video. In this video, we're going to talk about the rectangle tool, which is going to be one of the most useful and used tools in Figma. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to click on rectangle. And as you can see right here, if you click on the arrow, you're going to see a bunch of other tools that we're going to talk about and explore in a moment. But let's just focus on the rectangle tool. Now, in order to create a rectangle, it's actually very easy. Simply left click and hold with the left mouse button. And as you can see, we created a rectangle. So far, so good. Now, there's a few different options that I want you to learn about. The first one being the corner radius, because a lot of the times these days, if you're working on UI designs or UX designs, chances are that you want to maybe round up those corners, and this is going to be useful to create all sorts of different shapes. And the radius, you can use a few different options in order to increase the radius or decrease the radius. You can use Shift plus the up arrow in order to go by increments of 10. So up and down arrows. Alternatively, you can see that as I hover over this section in the corner radius, the cursor changes, and this indicates that if I hold and drag with the left mouse button, I can literally resize the gradient in a live preview. Now there's also another option, which is independent corners. And this is going to basically smooth out the corners individually. So if I just want to smooth out this one right here, I can literally just decrease it. And as you can see, it's going to be really useful for chat UI elements or things of that nature, really. Now, on top of that, there's a few different options which are going to be common to most of these other elements in Figma. And we're going to explore the fill very briefly. So in order to change the color of this rectangle, I can simply go over here, change the fill, and I can use pretty much any color in the color wheel. I can also update the opacity. So if I want a rectangle to be slightly opaque and transparent, really, that is the correct word, what I was trying to communicate. And I'm going to create an ellipse right here, and I'm going to basically bring it to the back. You can see this concept of transparency even better, and this is going to change the alpha channel. So start to become familiar with these vocabulary. And essentially, this is going to be it for this basic introduction. We're going to go into much more details as to all of these other sections in further videos, but for this one, we are good to go. So let's continue with the very next. In this video, we're going to talk about lines and arrows in Figma. So in order to create a line or an arrow, you can easily simply click on the top left menu item. And as you're going to click and hold with the left mouse button, you can see that we're creating a line. Now, at this moment, it's barely visible, and the reason why is that the stroke isn't set to a high enough number, but if we do so, you can see that the line is going to become more visible. Now, there is a trick that you can use when it comes to the line tool, and that is you can actually turn it into an arrow or even a double-sided arrow by simply selecting this item right here. So as you can see, I can change the end area of the line, and I can make it an arrow. I can simply assign a different type of ending points for this very line. Alternatively, you can create an arrow by simply clicking on the arrow item, and as you're going to see, there is quite a bit of a similarity, meaning that first of all, we're going to need to update the stroke, but most importantly, you're going to have these ending points which are going to determine if this is going to be a line, an arrow, or even a double arrow. So this is the line tool in a nutshell, and I'll see you in the very next video. In this video, we're going to talk about the Ellipse tool. Now, in order to access the Ellipse tool, simply click on the arrow on the top left icon, and you're going to find the ellipse, which you can also use the keyboard shortcut O. At this point, you can create an ellipse, and if you hold Shift, you can see that you can create a perfect circle. And as you create the ellipse, you can actually see that on the very right hand side, there is this small dot, which if you hover over, the cursor is going to change, and you're also going to find the label arc next to it. Now, this means that if you hold and click, you can actually create a element which is going to be very useful for creating pie charts, for example, or even illustrations such as the good old Pac-Man. Now, jokes aside, you can actually create also charts with the ratio, which is going to enable you to easily add a empty hole inside of this shape. So you can easily see how you can start actually creating different variations of this. And you can even create charts directly by simply tweaking these elements, and you can start adding different items to the same composition. Now, this is pretty much it when it comes to the ellipse. There isn't too much else to it. You can also see all of the data and coordinates of the start point, as well as the sweep and the ratio on the top right hand corner. So if you need to go really minute when it comes to the measurements, you can easily do that directly from here. And I'll see you in the very next video. In this video, we're going to talk about the Polygon tool in Figma. So in order to access it, it's very easy. Simply go on the top left menu and click on the Polygon tool. And as you click and hold with the left mouse button, you're going to see that by default, it's going to create a triangle. But if you change the options here in the polygon count, you can see that you can start adding more points and edges to the polygon. So you can create all sorts of different polygon shapes. Now, as the other tools and shapes, the same rules pretty much apply. There's just two things that you want to keep in mind. First of all, there's the radius option right here. And there's also another option which allows you to change the count of the edges and points of the polygon, which you can access directly from here. So you can make it more visual all the way to making it pretty much a full ellipse. So this is pretty much it for the polygon. As always, you can change the different colors and add strokes or different effects directly from the right column. And yeah, pretty much all the rest is going to be the same. So very quick lesson how to create a polygon in Figma. Okay, in this video, we're briefly going to talk about the Star tool, which you can access by clicking on the drop-down arrow on the top left-hand corner. And as you can see, we have the Star tool right here. Now, for the most part, pretty simple, just like the other tools and shapes. Simply hold the left mouse button and drag and drop it. As you can see, there's going to be some distortions, but if you hold the shift key, this is going to basically be solved as you're going to create a perfect star. Now, as you can see, the moment that I hover over the star, there's going to be a few touch points. The very first one, probably going to be familiar with, it's going to be the radius. So if you want to smooth out the corners a little bit, simply use the radius tool. And there's also the ratio, which as you can see is going to determine the ratio of the stars. So you can basically adjust these points as you prefer. And there's also the count, since you might want to do a star with more or less touch points. So you can easily do that directly from here or from the right side panel. You can adjust the count directly from here, as well as the ratio, which you can easily adjust on the go. So this is pretty much it when it comes to the star tool. All of the other items and options, just the fill, the stroke, all those items are pretty much the same for each and every shape. So that's pretty much it. In this video, we're going to see how to use typography in Figma. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add some text using the text tool. And you can also use the keyboard shortcut T. And as you click and you start typing in text or whatever you want, really, you're going to see that on the right, there's going to be this section, which is all about the typography. So starting from the top, you can see that we have the typeface, and this is going to allow you to browse through all of the typographic families and fonts right here. So you can easily just select them, and based on the font which you selected, you're going to see a series of options. In this case, we're going to use Inter, which is a free Google web font. And as you can see, I also typed in the search to quickly browse through in order to avoid having to scroll infinitely. And right below the font family, which I'm going to close the window, you can see that in this case, we have all of the font weights. So Inter has a lot of different weights to its font family. And I can select, for example, the semi-bold. I'm just going to zoom in so that you can easily see these differences. You can change basically the font weight by doing it like this. Now on the right, you're going to see the size. So if you want to increase the size of this text, we're going to increase the number by a couple of points, and that is going to essentially work its magic. Now for the other option, I'm going to add some text, and this is how it went. And I'm basically going to give it a 2 lines distribution. So this is going to be the option for the line height. So you can easily just increase or decrease the line height by using this option. And here on the right, you can adjust the letter spacing. So in case you want to stretch it out, you can easily do it by increasing the letter spacing percentage. And if you want to maybe create some text which is more narrow and having the letters closer to each other, you can easily just adjust this accordingly. Now, this other option is going to be the paragraph spacing, which I don't have a paragraph, so it's not easy to explain this concept, but actually it's very easy. Just imagine that if you have multiple paragraphs, this is going to dictate the distance between one paragraph and the other. And I'm actually going to just grab a paragraph just to show you a real life example. Okay, so I'm magically back with some paragraphs of the good old Lorem Ipsum text. As you can see, when I adjust the paragraph spacing, it's not going to adjust each and every line height, but it's just going to adjust the distance and the height from one paragraph to the other. Now, let's talk about another really useful tool, which I'm actually going to reduce the amount of text for the sake of explanation. And this is going to be something that you're going to use quite often, and this is the auto width. Now, by default, Figma is basically creating boxes similarly to what you're used to when you're coding on the web of having divs almost. And if you wanted to basically say to Figma, hey, just stretch the text as much as you can, disregard the default fixed size, just click on auto width. And as you can see, this is going to enable you to have this look which is stretched, but in reality what it's doing, it's essentially taking up all the space that it can in order to display that element. So if I basically stretch it back all the way here, it's going to move back to a fixed size. Then I can go and use the auto width to basically enable it to stretch it. And it might seem like a small thing, but when you're working on a lot of UI screens, like I do, I'm a designer by trade. I've been doing this for over 10 years. There's going to be multiple instances where you just want the text to stretch. So this is definitely something which is very useful and might want to keep it in mind. Now, talking about spacing, and we have to discuss the alignment side of things, because by default, the text is left aligned, but you can also align it center and right align. So it's pretty straightforward. Most softwares you can do this. So you might already be quite familiar with this. And the very next option is going to be the alignment vertical. So you can align some text to the center or even to the bottom of a delimited area. So based on the rectangle, in this case, that you're limiting the text, you're going to be able to basically adjust this to accommodate the spacing accordingly. Now, on top of that, there's some other type settings which you can access by clicking on these three dots. These are kind of hidden settings. You might not use them as often, but some of these come in really handy. So, for example, there's the justified alignment, which is something that wasn't available here, but it's definitely available in Figma if you access this option right here. You can also change the case to uppercase, lowercase, or title case. And then there's a bunch of different items which we won't necessarily go into much detail in this video, because it would be better to show with some examples of specific UX, UI, use cases. But some of the most common ones are going to be the list style. So if you want to create lists, you can easily do that from here. And you can also change the bullet list to numbered list very easily. There's the list spacing, which enables you to change the gutter between one list item and the other, as well as the paragraph spacing, which again is going to be related to the paragraph. Then there's a bunch of other items which in all sincerity I don't really use all that often, and it's probably going to be overkill for this introductory video. So we're just going to keep it as that, and hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you in the very next one. In this video we're going to talk about editing images in Figma. So we have this beautiful image from a author on Unsplash.com, which is my #1 resource when it comes to finding images, together with freepik.com. And we're going to essentially select the image and click on the right hand side where the small image thumbnail is. And as you're going to see, this model is going to open up, and we're going to have a few different options. So starting from the very top, you can decide if you want to organize this image in a fill state, or if you wanted to basically make it fit the rectangle, so, or any shape really that you want to add. So we're actually going to showcase this by creating a rectangle, and I'm simply going to use Option Alt and the Command C, and basically using Option Alt Command V. And this is going to essentially copy the image within the same element. Now that that is done, we can see actually these changes. Because if I set it to fill, you can see that it's going to fill up the entire shape, and it's going to have a different effect if we set it to fit, which is essentially going to fit the entire image within that shape. So something very important, very critical to keep in mind. Now, if we set it back to fill, and now we select the crop element, you can see that the crop selection is going to enable us to see the borders of the image, since it's not covering up the entire area. And what we can do is we can simply hold and drag with the left mouse button, and we can select the exact area that we want the image to be cropped within this specific element. Now, another option that we have, and actually before we do that, I also want to show you that you can also resize it with the crop. But if you do so, you can see that this is going to distort the image. So in order to fix this, simply hold the Shift key, and with the Shift key, you can basically resize it within the original aspect ratio. Now, if we select the tile, you can see that you can create a tile effect, and this might not be the best use case for this specific image, but there's going to be situations where you want to have an image repeating. Maybe it's going to be a pattern, which is very common on digital designs on the web or social media. So definitely something that you want to keep in mind is this tile option. And you can set the percentage, and the more you increase the percentage, the more it's going to affect the size of the image, and the less that you make this percentage, you can see that we're creating smaller and smaller tiles, which are going to repeat the image even more. So we're going to go back to the original one, which is simply the fill. And we're going to explore a few different options that we still have when it comes to the image. The first one being is you can rotate the image by 90% or 90 degrees increments by clicking on this button right here. You can also decide to change the image by clicking on Choose Image. And if I select another image, you can see that it's going to essentially substitute the current image. Now we're going to go back by using Command Z in order to undo this action. And here are a few different options which you might be already familiar, since they're quite common these days throughout all sorts of different softwares and apps. But you can adjust the exposure of the image. You can also adjust the contrast levels, the saturation, which is the amount of colors or lack of colors that you want within the image, and also the temperature, and similarly also the tint. So if you want a different temperature or tint, you can do that from here. You can also decide to just increase or decrease the highlights within this image, as well as the shadows. Now, although this is a great starting point for editing images, there is a better solution that you can use completely for free within Figma, which we're going to show in a future video, which, spoiler, is going to be using the Photopea plugin, which essentially enables you to have Photoshop or as close of a version of Photoshop as you can imagine within the Figma ecosystem, entirely for free within the software. So really excited about showing you that, but That being said, when it comes to basic image editings, you can easily do that directly from here. And that's pretty much it. I hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you in the very next one. In this video, we're going to talk about the colors and the blend modes in Figma. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a rectangle, and we're going to outline it over here. And in order to access the color options, simply click on the far right under the fill option, and you're going to see that this small model is going to open up, and by default it's going to be selected on the solid colors. So as you can see, you can easily change the colors of this element directly from here. You have the color wheel. You can even pick and choose a color from the current document. And on top of that, you can easily adjust the transparency of this color directly from here. Now, if you have a design system set up, you can also select the colors from the design system directly from here. So this is going to be document color by default, but if you have other themes, you're going to see them directly on this section. Now let's go on to the next option, which is the gradients, which is probably something that you're going to use quite a lot, especially if you're dealing with digital design projects. And you can easily change the direction of the gradient directly by manipulating these two interpolation points. And as you can see, you can see the preview of these 2 points directly into this model. So if I select the first one and I change the color, you can see how that is being affected in the actual gradient system. And if I select the second one, you can see that there are updates, but they're a little bit more subtle than this solid color. And the reason being is that by default, whenever you select the gradient, you're going to have the second touch point set to 0%. Now simply bring it all the way to 100, and you're going to be able to make those changes very, very easily. Now at this point, another thing that you want to keep in mind is that you're not limited to just linear gradients, but you have the option to select, for example, radial gradients, which, as the name suggests, is going to be more focused on creating a circular gradient around it. You can also switch the order of these gradients real quick by simply changing them and swapping them directly into this element. You can also add more gradient touch points by simply clicking on any area of this area. And as you can see, you can create all sorts of different effects in a very short amount of time. Another gradient option which we have at our disposal is the angular, which is going to be, as the name suggests, a gradient which starts at an angle, goes all the way 360 degrees. Probably not going to use this a whole lot, but definitely good to keep in mind as it's quite helpful for some specific use cases. And also the diamond, which, as the name suggests, is going to create this diamond shape around the gradients. Now, one more thing to keep in mind when it comes to the colors is that by default, the colors are set to hex values, since this is going to be, or actually is, the most used color systems, especially on the web. But you are not limited to only that. You can also select if you want RGB, if you want the CSS RGBA value, which essentially the A stands for alpha, and that is the transparency, essentially. So as you can see, the moment that I decrease the transparency on any selected color, this alpha channel, which is the last one, is going to be affected. And also HSL and HSB. So this is pretty much it when it comes to the ingredients. and I'll see you in the very next video. In this video, we're going to talk about masks and how you can use them easily in Figma. So the very first thing that we're gonna do is we're going to grab an image. So simply find an image on your favorite resource. In my case, it's going to be either Unsplash or freepik.com. And we're going to create a first element, which is going to be a rectangle. And as you can see, this is just a image layer, and these are all pretty much vectors. So the very first thing that you want to keep in mind when it comes to creating masks is that the image always needs to be on top of the vector layer or any layer that you want to use as a mask. So in this case, we're simply going to move the rectangle here on top, and the image, we're gonna make sure that it's on top of the rectangle. Then we're going to move it on the rectangle itself. And if you want, one suggestion that I have is whenever you're creating a mask, you can actually decrease the opacity in order to see more or less where you are locating that image. So this is not something that you necessarily need to do beforehand, because as you're going to see in a minute, you can actually adjust these values right afterwards. So I'm going to just turn it up to 100%, and I'm going to select both the image layer and the rectangle layer. So once that both are selected with the image on top, I'm simply going to click here on the very top, use as mask. And as you can see, a mask has been created. Now let's take a moment to see what is happening behind the scenes in the layers panel. So we noticed that a mask group has been created. So by default, we're going to have this new group. And in this group, there's two elements. The image layer, which is pretty much the same as we left it off, and the rectangle layer, which is now a mask, as you can see, with the same symbol as the use as mask call to action. And we're also going to see this arrow right here, which indicates what is the extent of this mask. So basically, what are the layers that are included in this mask? Because you can actually add multiple layers. In fact, if I use Command C and Command V to create a copy of this image, I can actually have two images within the same mask. So this is going to be something that's going to be useful for some more advanced projects. Now we're going to just remove the first one. And as you can see, the moment that I select the image, there's going to be the usual border selection, and I can move around this image within the mask. So it's not something that creates a rasterized image once you apply a mask effect. It's just still going to keep the layers separate in a way which is flexible. And you can always undo the mask, first of all, by ungrouping the mask group. So if I go and I do ungroup, you're going to notice that this doesn't necessarily solve the actual problem, because I actually need to unmask this initial layer. Otherwise, it's going to capture all of the layers that are going to be on top. In fact, if you move these layers on top, you can see that now all of these other elements are masked within this rectangle. And I'm telling you this because it's so easy to get this wrong, and you're going to find yourself working on designs where you accidentally can't move or find the right layers, and probably it's going to be the mask that's causing the issues. So to solve this, it's very easy. Simply right click on the actual mask layer, and might not sound intuitive, but click on use as mask, and this is going to unmask this element, and it's going to be brought back to its original state, so just a rectangle. And you can do this with any vector shape. So I can select the image and this ellipse, and I'm simply going to duplicate it to show you with the other ones. As you can see, I can easily mask with an ellipse. I can also easily mask on rectangles and do the same also on random vector shapes, which I created previously using the pen tool, which is going to be a tool which we're going to explore more in future videos. So as you can see, masks are pretty easy to use, very intuitive, and they can help you achieve all sorts of different effects and goals in Figma. In this video, we're going to talk about frames and specifically about alignment and positioning and how the two work together. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead on the top left and we're going to create a frame. And within this frame, actually, we're going to actually change the background just so that it's a little bit more visible so that we can understand the concept better. And we're going to create 3 rectangles right inside of this frame. So we're going to make these black, and as you can see, the rectangles are within the frames by default, since we literally created them within the frame. Now, the very first thing that I wanted to basically show you is the top alignment. So you can align a group of elements with these 3 options right here when it comes to the vertical alignment. So top alignment, as you can see, it's essentially going to bring everything on the top. And if you make these of different sizes, you're actually going to see this concept even better. If we use the align vertical center, this is going to basically have a imaginary line towards the very center of this 3 objects. And if we go with the bottom alignment, you can see that now this X line is going to be at the very bottom. Now the same is true also for the vertical alignment. And I'm just going to rotate this for the sake of simplicity. If I select all 3 of these rectangles and I use the right align, you can see that all of these are moved to the right. Same for the left, and then in the center is going to basically center it vertically. Now let's take a step back and let's go and delete all of them except for one. And I'm going to show you how this works in relation to the frame. So for example, if I just have one element or even a group of elements and I center it, you can see that it's going to be centered relative to the parent, so the frame. So this is going to be the child, which is relative to the parent. And I can pretty much use all of these alignment options directly in relation to this frame. So this is going to be really useful. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, you can actually create a group. And as you can see, we just grouped it. I used the Command G in order to use the shortcut. And this is going to work pretty much for any object within the group in relation to the frame. Because if you bring these out of the frame and you try to basically use these alignment options, as you can see, it's essentially going to align in relation to themselves. So they're just center aligning in relation to themselves. I'm going to bring this down to 50% opacity so that you can see that this guy is actually still here, and they're just doing them in relation to themselves, compared to if you actually go ahead and bring them into the frame and you can actually align them accordingly and in relation to the frame. Now, one last alignment option, which is quite useful and important at the same time, is going to be, and I'm just going to ungroup this so we just have one single rectangle, and I'm going to create a few different smaller rectangles, and I'm going to basically give them some different spacing between one another, and they are all loosened up. And now under the more options, I want to show you this feature right here, which is tidy up. As you can see, it's going to, in this case, tidy up the spacing in between them horizontally. And if I use Command Z and I use the distribute horizontal spacing, you can see how this works in a very similar way, just that it's only focused on horizontal spacing. You can also go over here and vertically center them. And as you can see, you can start mixing up these concepts that you just learned in order to create order and give specific alignments in a very precise way and in a very fast way. And this is going to be true also horizontally. So if we bring this frame and we tilt it 90 degrees, and we move around these guys right here so that they have different spacing. I'm going to use the distribute vertical spacing right here in order to actually give the same spacing vertically. You can also center them according to their zone, and as you can see, we achieved the very same result in a matter of a few seconds. So this is the spacing and the relation to the frame in just a few minutes. Now, I encourage you to take a moment and experiment, because this is actually going to be something that you're going to use extensively in your career as a designer. So it's really important to master and become familiar with these tools. In this video, we're going to talk about strokes and borders and how you can easily apply them in Figma. So without further ado, let's go on, and we're going to create a rectangle, which we're going to basically bring over here towards the center. And as you're going to see on the very right, beneath the fill section, there is the stroke. Now, in order to apply it, simply click on the stroke. And as you can see, the moment that we do that, we're going to have a basic stroke, which we can barely see in this instance. And the reason being is that the rectangle is quite large. It's almost 1000 plus pixels. So we're going to need to increase the stroke size, which we can easily do by simply clicking over here. And we can increase the number. I'm using the up arrow key in the keyboard, but you can also type in any number that you want. And you can also simply click and hold with the left mouse button over this area in order to basically add or remove a stroke size in a very easy and visual way. Now, one important thing to keep in mind when it comes to the stroke is that by default, it's going to be set to inside. That means that it's inside the actual element, but you can also select it outside. So as you can see, once we select the element, this blue line, which basically gives us the borders or containers of this element, is right beneath the stroke, because the stroke has been located outside. And you can also center it. So it's going to be a middle way in between outside and inside. So this is going to be key in a lot of different nuances, situations. So definitely keep it in mind. We're going to keep it inside for the sake of this explanation. And as you can see, you can also set the strokes per side by clicking on this icon right here. And this is going to prompt this drop-down menu where you can select only to have the stroke on the top, on the bottom, on the left, or on the right. You can even customize it so that you can actually have certain type of strokes on only certain sides. And this is going to be quite useful in some specific situations. So it's not something that you're going to use all the time. I personally rarely use it, but it's definitely good to keep it in mind. Now, if you click on this three dots menu, you're going to see that this enables us to access the advanced stroke options. Now, this is, for example, giving us the ability to add a dash, and I'm actually going to simply create a line in order to explain this concept even better. And I'm going to give it a stroke of, say, 62. I'm going to click again on the three dots menu. We're going to use the dash. Now, as you can see, this dashed line is quite big and clunky. So you can actually tweak these options by simply using the dash tool right here, and you can basically make it smaller. So as you can see, the smaller it gets, the number, the smaller also the strokes. And you're probably going to need to tweak also the stroke dimension as well in order to achieve, for example, something which reminds you of a square square dotted line or things of that nature. So it's going to be a combination of one or the two values, depending on what you're looking to do. You can also set the dash cap, which if we go back and we turn it to solid, and basically if we go back and we change this, it's going to be just will be easier to show you how the dash cap is going to change. And as you can see, the difference between square and none is very subtle. But if you have a close look at these small icons, you're going to notice that the point in the dash cap of none is going to end exactly where the dash finishes, while with a square, there's going to be an extra. So this is going to be very clear if you have a look at the left side, or actually right side, right here, or I mean, it's going to be the same for both, right? But if you have a look at the very edge, it's going to be clear that here the stroke finishes and the dash finishes, and there's no any extra element or area. And if I select the square, you can see that now we do have this extra area. So keep it in mind, especially if you're having issues with some stroke related illustrations or things of that nature that you're creating. So this is pretty much it when it comes to the stroke. The same also applies for the colors. You can easily tweak them. As with the fills, you can add gradients to the strokes. You can add even images and video. It's really remarkable what you can do. So you're totally free to basically apply these values just as you would with the other controls. You can also change, of course, it's going to be related to the line, but anyways, with the stroke, you can really do pretty much any effect in relation to this feature. So I'll see you in the very next